Everyone, I hope you're having a great third day of Summit and finding value in the sessions that you're attending. Welcome back to the Teams and Culture track. I am here to introduce Otto Ruettinger. Otto's been in tech for 20 years, the last 4 of those at Atlassian, and he's currently the head of product for Jira Cloud Platform. And a fun fact about Otto is that he loves cycling so much that the last bike that he bought, he had to sell his car to pay for it. So, welcome, Otto.
Thank you.
Can I do that?
Thank you, Kindle. Excellent. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about something that I love, and that's OKRs, Objective and Key Results. And there's probably not that many people that you would meet that would say they love OKRs. But first, let's talk a little bit about who knows what objectives and key results are. So if you know what an OKR is, put your hand up. Great, that's most of the room. Keep your hand up if you're using them currently. All right, yeah, 30% maybe. And keep your hand up if you think you're doing an awesome job of using OKRs. Oh, you and me are talking at the end of this. Excellent. So we have a play for OKRs, and I wanted to provide a little bit more perspective on how you put things to life with that play for OKRs. And I think there's 3 things that are really important about objectives and key results, and that is that they can align your teams with your strategy and empower those teams to execute that strategy, and they are team triad glue. And you're probably wondering what triad means. Don't worry, I'll get to that. And then last, and for me the most important thing, is that they are actually a learning framework that help your teams to learn and act. So as we go through this, I'm going to try to talk to you about these 3 things, but we'll also sprinkle a few pro tips along the way as well, because they're not easy to implement, but they are very rewarding for you and your teams. So we didn't invent OKRs. OKRs have been around for quite a while, for 20 to 30 years now, and some very large and very successful companies use OKRs. Some of them credit much of their success to OKRs. So Google credits much of the success of YouTube and its rapid growth to OKRs. And Intel literally would not be around and would not have won the microprocessor wars against Motorola if they hadn't used OKRs. That's what their then CEOs said at the time. So they're a very, very powerful framework used by many companies, and we are just one of those, but I'll share with you how they're a little bit unique in the way that we apply them within our culture, because in this world, there's actually no such thing as a best practice. Because culture reinforces practice, and practice reinforces culture. So you can't just take a practice and expect it to work somewhere. The 2 have to work together. So I'll try to cover a little bit of that. So first up, OKRs basically stands for Objectives and Key Result. So the first is the objective, that's what you're trying to achieve, and there's multiple key results that get paired with that particular objective. So if we take a very simple example, let's talk about FC Barcelona, whose objective it could be to win the European World Championships. So if you're a soccer fan, you probably like this. If you're a soccer fan, don't call me out in the stats. They're completely made up. They're not researched. But the point here is that first you've got the objective, and beneath that you've got some key results. So for Barcelona to win the European Championship, one of the key factors I've got here is to increase time in the opposition's half from 52% to 72%. So you can see it's a very specific, measurable result that we're shooting for there. Shots at goal go from 22 to 40, and win away from home record goes to 33 to 60. Now, what FC Barcelona probably had to do to identify these things was to figure out what are the most impactful things that correlate with a win and a path to a European Championship, and then identify those, and then start working on actions, and their teams start trying to drive those metrics in the right direction, and they measure them objectively along the way. So let's do a quick anatomy of an objective. The first thing is that should combine both the spirit and the outcome. In the example we just had, winning is the spirit as well as the outcome, and it needs to be concisely stated. If you're writing an objective, and it's a paragraph or it's a 50-word sentence, forget it, rub it out, and start again. Because the whole point of this is that anybody in a team knows these things, and therefore knows the work that they're going to do to contribute towards this goal. So they have to be very concisely stated. The KRs are really the best levers that you have that you think will propel you towards that particular objective. You should have between 3 to 5 of those. So the idea is not to boil the ocean and have a list of 10 or 20 things. You need to have a small number of these so that you're selective and you're focused on the things that you think will make the best impact. And this last one here is really important, that they should be written in such a way that anybody from outside of your team or organization should be able to read it and go, I get that. I understand how that works, because they need to be that simple and crisp so that everybody knows exactly what we're trying to achieve. Now, the scoring is something that sometimes confuses people a little bit. The scoring basically works on a scale of 0 to 1. So we had our goal before of 22 to 40 shots at goal for the team. If you have an average of 22, that's a 0, and the other end's a 40, halfway in between, you score a 0.5. When you set the goal, you always state it in terms of reaching a 1.0 objective, but a 1.0 objective should be really hard. It should make you feel really uncomfortable. It should be something that challenges you and your teams to think about an alternative path. If you're setting a goal where you can just keep heading along the same path, it's not stretching you enough. Because we always want to set something that's more ambitious, that drives our teams further. And then when we score these goals, if you shoot a 0.7, we call that green. We say that's a good result. A 1.0 is awesome, it's party time, that's fantastic, most of the time. Which brings me to a pro tip. Scoring 1.0 consistently is bloody terrible. You don't want that, which sounds kind of counterintuitive at first, right? But the reality is, if you have teams that constantly score 1.0 on all of their KRs and all of their OKRs, they're not embracing that stretchy nature and ambitious goal setting that I just spoke about, and perhaps they're phoning it in, or perhaps they're scared to commit too much. I'm going to talk a little bit later on about psychological safety and the importance of that for this. But hitting 1.0, if we have that for a team, that's the worst result that you can have. Nobody gets in trouble for being red. Nobody has to come up with a great report of, what have they done wrong for being red. That's okay, as long as you learn from it. And we'll talk more about that too. The second pro tip is to stay focused. It's quite tempting to say, well, we need to do these 5 things. We need to do these 10 things. The whole point of OKRs are that they focus you in on the things that are most important to you. That could be at company level, that could be at team level, or it could be department level. It's there to make sure that you're spending your effort on the things that are going to produce the best results. So let's talk a little bit about how OKRs fit into the Atlassian organization, because they work at multiple different levels. First, at the company level, when we start our year, we have a set of OKRs. So we have 4 O's, and each of those has 4 to 5 KRs behind them. And they set our entire company strategy for all the teams at Atlassian. So any team should be able to look up at that and go, I know I'm contributing to this one here, or I'm contributing to that one there. One step down from there, we start getting into products and or departments. So marketing and HR and IT also have OKRs, but we break that down one level further. So for instance, we talked yesterday in the keynote about the fact that we're trying to make our products more performant. So we have a performance index score of 85 that we're shooting for across all of Atlassian cloud products. So when we break that down into Jira, it also has to contribute 85 to that. So we're trying to get from 68 to 85 in the space of a year. So Trello's got a goal for that, Confluence has got a goal for that, etc. Then a level down from there, if we take Jira teams as an example, we've got a set of teams, and obviously we have more than 4 teams in Jira, but there's not enough room on this slide to show all of my teams. But each of these teams also has a set of OKRs that they set that again decompose the work to be done one level further. Last thing to think about is the time frame that these things work on. At the company level, we only ever set yearly ones, so we don't have quarterly OKRs at company level because it takes a long time at that high level of strategy to get agreement. So we do that once per year, and then we break that down, say, right, how do we want to be able to do that? And that breaking down happens when we get to the product level. At the product level, we set both yearly, and we break down the yearly goals into quarterly. So the idea is that you want to see that you have a path that gets you to that. If I use the performance example from 68 to 85, we need to see that there's a path, and we try to determine what's the best path for that. Is that a linear line? Is there a hockey stick? Do we expect early wins? And the team has to come to agreement for what that shape should look like for that progress. At the team level, we only ever provide quarterly goals. We want teams focused on short-term execution. And what we try to do is to make sure that as we cascade the goals, that there's alignment for the long-term objectives and the short-term OKRs that are being set by the teams. So, speaking of teams, a question that I literally got multiple times both yesterday and today is how does Atlassian think of a team? How does Atlassian structure a team? And it was funny because I was talking to the team playbook folks, and they're like, we don't actually have a playbook for that yet. So hopefully after this, we'll probably create one. But basically, the way that we structure our teams is that at the head of every team, we have what we call a triad. And the triad consists of a product manager, a designer, and a developer. And essentially, the product manager is kind of the captain here and decides what needs to be done. The developer and designer are both responsible for the how of what needs to be done. So the developer might decide it's going to be built on this tech stack. We're going to use this approach for it. The designer might say, hey, it's got to be this interaction experience that we're going to deliver. And that's how that relationship works. So when we use OKRs, the OKRs are awesome to be used amongst that triad because you've got all the functions represented. But there's obviously a larger team that sits around that, primarily a development team, who actually then has to do the work of turning the key results into things that we want to ship to customers that produce different behavior and perception from customers. So the development team for us is usually about 7 or so people. And then we also have quality engineering that act like an enabler to make sure that there's quality development happening and being practiced by the development team. And we have information experience that makes sure that the text experience that we provide, both within the product and in our documentation, is a beautiful experience. So that's how the whole team works. So when OKRs are being discussed, it definitely happens in the triad. The development manager here is responsible for representing the rest of the team in that. That's mostly how we do it. And that's important because if you're trying to reach consensus with a group of 10, that's probably not a good use of your time. Because you think about the number of relationships that have to exist in there, that's huge. You can think about the number of different things that can derail you in there, that's massive. So you want the development manager to be the person that brings the perspective of development. And he might want to bring other people into that meeting from time to time too, that's great. And we're not fully opinionated about this either amongst our teams. If they want to do an OKR setting session with their whole team, go for it, that's fine. But my personal philosophy is that that triad, are the best place to be able to make the decisions about how do we go about setting these goals. So let's talk about how OKRs align and empower teams. So the first thing they do is that they make your company's strategy very clear. Once you actually have to state it in a really short objective and put measures around that, it becomes crystal clear as to what we're trying to actually achieve. Of course, you want to write those smartly, so that's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. If you haven't heard that before, Google SMART goals and you'll find it easily. And they should be outcome-oriented. This is really important. What you don't want is an OKR that says, ship thing, ship new navigation experience. That's a terrible OKR. One, it has no measure. And two, why do you want to ship that thing? There's a reason behind that. There's something you're trying to achieve. A better objective might be increase the number of successful navigations to issue in Jira by X%. Now you're being much more specific about what you want the outcome behavior from a customer to be. Or it might be we want the perceived usability as measured by UX Lite surveys in product to move from 63 to 70. That's actually our goal this year. But we want it to be something that's actually about delivering value, and value is measured by perception and behavior of users, not by a thing that we've shipped. The other thing OKRs do is that they focus teams. Teams have to be more selective to decide what an objective in the KRs are. Again, this is about the idea of only having 3 KRs or up to 5 KRs for something. That means teams have to go through and evaluate, well, what are the different things that we could do to reach this objective? And then they have to stack rank those and figure out, hey, which one of these do we want to concentrate on? And while they're a great way of articulating strategy, they're not a substitute for all your other communications. So when we set our strategy, we still do town halls where Mike and Scott say, this is why we're doing this is how we're doing this is where we think our strengths lie, this is why this is important for customers long term, and we provide a rich view of that, but we also talk about the OKRs that then provide way more specificity to say, this is what we actually want to achieve. So it doesn't replace town halls, it doesn't replace blogging, it doesn't replace the interaction that your teams have to communicate that strategy face to face and cascade that. So, pro tip number 3, use a score key. So for us, a score key helps you to actually score a KR. This is a real example that we had from last year. For those of you that are in Jira Cloud, you'll notice that we have changed our navigation from top bar navigation to sidebar navigation. And what we wanted to do here was to eventually turn off the old portion of that. We essentially migrated our customers slowly over time. We started with like 1%, we went 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20, 40, and eventually got to the point where only recently we've turned off the old navigation entirely and migrated all of our customers over. So a goal we set for ourselves was, hey, we want to try to get this done. And the goal was the option to use the old Jira experience was turned off for 100% of instance tenants before the end of the quarter. And to score that, we said, well, let's put a score key with that to make it really crisp, and we made the score key on the time. So you get a 0.3 if you did that by November. That was later than what we wanted to do it. You get a 0.5 by October. That's still late, but not when we wanted it. And 0.7 was when the team thought, yeah, we think this is where we're going to hit it. But you know what? A 1.0, we're going to try to make that happen by Summit. We're going to stretch ourselves to that, which means we're going to have to try to do something differently. You'll see that there's a glaringly red 0 on here, because that was Summit last year, and we only just turned it off. And I asked Daniel here, hey, are you okay with me putting your name up here? Because this is not a made-up name. This is somebody who works for me. He's like, yeah, sure. And that's because red is not bad. Remember that I said that before? You cannot ever make OKRs a thing where if somebody fails, they're in trouble, because you will break OKRs entirely, because you'll no longer have people trying to learn from them, because everyone will start sandbagging. I'll come back to that more. So, when we're setting the goals, there's often a question I get is, what's the right approach? Should there be a tops-down approach where Mike and Scott set the OKRs and then everybody just cascades them down and then the teams at the bottom go, thank you, great, I'll work on that now? Or is it bottoms up, where teams say, you know what, we're close to the customer, this is what we're hearing, we should definitely work on this thing over here, and we're going to work on that, and say, hey guys, that's what we're working on. And as always, the answer is more complicated than those two extremes, because if you do just tops down, then sure, you'll get really good alignment that everybody will hear what the strategy is for Mike and Scott, but they haven't been involved in actually deciding what the thing is they're going to work on. How engaged do you think those people are going to be? How much do you think they're going to be passionate about what they're doing? If it's just, hey, go do that thing. That's not what we do. We think that's a totally wrong way to do it. The other extreme, where it's bottoms up, and you have a team that says, okay, I'm going to go improve usability, and I'm going to do that by changing how post functions work in Jira. Now, that might appear for that team to be exactly the right thing to work on, but how does that align with the strategy? Is that the right thing to work when we want to say, hey, we want to improve the overall usability of Jira? Probably not, because that thing doesn't have enough user traffic and footprint to make a difference to that score. So the answer is, it's not bottoms up or tops down, it's both. You have to have conversations between each of those levels. So when Mike and Scott and the rest of us in the leadership team set the goals between the products and Mike and Scott, we have those conversations, say, hey, this is what we think we should do, and eventually we settle on the right thing. So we have both involvement from the layer below, and we have the strategy from above. And same thing goes from product down to team. So, pro tip for those of you who are considering putting OKRs into place, one of the first things you're going to need is to get key people on board with OKRs. Like any organizational change, if you don't have your first line managers believing in what we're doing and believing in the fact that that's going to make them, their teams, and the company and customers more successful and happy, then the likelihood is you're not going to get there. So you need people to believe in it. So this is not about taking a framework and going, here you go, and expecting it to work. You have to take people on the journey for why is this important, which is actually why I'm here. My goal, my OKR, as you see later, is to help you understand that and that you are going to be prepared to be able to communicate that to your teams. So let's talk about team triad glue. I explained before what the triad is and what the team is, and OKRs are a way of binding that team much more closely together. Sometimes I get this from my teams. Sometimes they say, hey, this takes too long. Setting OKRs is hard. We spend so much time setting goals. We could be using that time to make progress. And yeah, okay, that's a criticism. I definitely don't agree with it. The point is, it should take time. If you did it really quickly, you didn't go deep enough. You didn't understand the problem that you're trying to solve deeply enough. You didn't reach agreement deeply enough. Your teams might think they agree on stuff, but they might not actually be agreed. So the OKRs force you to go that extra level of detail and say, well, what are we actually going to measure? And from that, you get a much deeper level of agreement. So a mentor of mine used to say to me that it's really easy to agree on surface level things. So how many Jira users have we got in the audience here? It's got to be more than that. There's people who've got their hands down, surely. All right, so if you're a Jira user, should we improve usability of Jira? Does anybody disagree with that? Nobody disagrees with that, right? That's what I think of as surface level agreement. That's just plain simple, right? Where it gets interesting is getting to the deeper level of agreement and saying, well, what does that mean? How do we do that? Well, what experience do we need to work on? So we know that navigation is a problem. People aren't finding their ways to their boards often enough, fast enough, without trackbacks. Configuration is hard, so we have to make configuration easier. That's what I spoke about yesterday at Keynote. The issue experience was too cluttered and poorly designed, and we saw friction around that too. So you have to decompose all of that to get to a deeper level of alignment. And by the Triad talking about those things and being able to understand that at a much deeper level means that they are going to end up more aligned on what are the things they're going to work on and how they're going to measure success. So the end benefit is that when it comes time to actually do the work, the team can act in unison towards their goal. Now, when you're setting OKR, you have a quantifiable measure that you're targeting. That means the team not only has to agree on the what, but also on the how and the project impact. So I spoke before about the fact that shipping a thing is not a good KR. It should always be about what is that going to mean for you. So the measurement aspect of it forces it to be another level of agreement deeper for teams to be more aligned. And when teams said before that, hey, this feels like it's overhead, it takes too long, this is difficult, and we're wasting time on that, I know, and my teams know, that you get that back later, and you get more back later in terms of downstream velocity. Because say a developer reaches a fork in the road and say, hey, I could turn left here, or I could turn right here with the way I build this. If you've had that discussion and that depth of understanding, they're going to be able to make those micro-level decisions with more accuracy and speed, rather than having to go back to a designer, hey, was it supposed to be green or blue, or hey, should I have built it this way or that way? They're much more likely to understand what they should be doing, so you get downstream velocity from this. That's one part. The other velocity you get is that you're not heading in the wrong direction. Remember, velocity is not, it's a direction, right? So if you say, hey, we're going to make this bit better, but that's not helping customers, then that's not exactly what we're trying to do. So Team Triad Glue, all of these things means that the teams are going to be more aligned at a deeper level of agreement so that they can work together in unison toward that goal. Now we let our teams decide how they reach that agreement, but we have a time in every month, in like week 10 or so, week 11, they get together of any quarter and they start talking about, hey, in next quarter, what do we want to do? Team Triad gets together, and then eventually they meet with the Triad above them, and they have that up and down conversation to set those, and at the end of it, we've got strong alignment amongst the Triads top to bottom, as well as within the Triads. Now, in order to do this well, pro tip, you need psychological safety and you need diversity. This is really important. So for the conversations around how to set these goals to be effective, you need to have many diverse and competing ideas be able to come forth. So you need for people to have psychological safety, which is basically that there's a shared belief that the environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. If I put an idea out there, somebody says to me, Otto, that's a shit idea. That's terrible. I don't understand why you come to these meetings. How likely am I going to be to put another idea out there, right? So we want to have that openness and that psychological safety for everyone to contribute to that. And one of the ways that you can foster that in your teams, and this is from research from somebody I was at a training camp with recently, and she looked at, hey, what's the number one factor for psychological safety? And the answer is actually put some females on the team. That immediately increases psychological safety on the team. That's awesome. That's cool. So we're really trying to be able to do that. So diversity is important because you have diversity of background, diversity of experience, and that should allow much more different, interesting ideas to come forth that the teams can consider about how to form their goals, which then shapes the strategy for what they're trying to execute. So now let's talk about my favorite part, and this is what I call learn and act, and this is a little bit of my own personal spin on OKRs. There's one certainty in life: change. Change is going to keep happening, and the rate of change is going to increase. I was trying to think this morning about the number of different companies that have been disrupted. Kodak comes to mind. BlackBerry comes to mind. The taxi industry comes to mind. And with machine learning coming up, God knows what else. So one thing's for certain, the rate of change is going to accelerate, and it's going to do it exponentially because it's powered by Moore's law. So the number one thing you can do for all your teams is to better prepare them for change. And that's why OKRs are a learning framework. That's so important. I'm going to say it again. OKRs are a learning framework. This is the number one purpose of OKRs. Because using OKRs, you can learn and act from what you've done. You have a hypothesis. From that hypothesis, you set a goal. You set a measure for that, and you're trying to prove or disprove that hypothesis. So here's some examples of learning that we might have. So when we get to the end of a quarter, or in the middle of a quarter review or end of a quarter review, we say, hey, teams, look at your OKRs and tell us what you learned. And when you tell us what you learned, it's not just a surface level learning. It should be a 5 whys deep learning. If you're familiar with 5 whys, it's the technique where you basically answer a question and you say why, and why, and why, and you get to a deeper level. If you go to the Atlassian team playbook, we've got a 5 whys play you can check out. But the idea is to get really deep understanding of why did you end up with the result you did. That could be because you smashed it and you got to 1.0. Great, let's learn about what happened here so we can do more of that and spread that to more teams. Or it could be, hey, we didn't do so great, we shot a 0.3 here. Let's figure out why we came short so that we can be better next time around. Some of the more common examples of that, and these are sort of kind of in order of how they happen over time when you first implement OKRs. First is poor planning. And this probably happens, you've probably seen this, where a team doesn't consider all the factors that they probably knew about that they should have considered. So for instance, a team might say, hey, Jane and Bob are going to be on holidays for 2 months each during that quarter. That's why we missed our goal. So maybe it's a good idea next time around to have a team calendar that says who's around for that. We had a bug load and that meant that we didn't get to our goal. Well, did you buffer plan for your bug load? Right, so that's kind of housekeeping level planning where we should just be good on that. Another example of a learning could be if there's an environmental change. And there's 2 kinds of these. There could be an internal one. So I might be dependent on the rich text editor team to be able to ship the new bento experience. So if that's the case, did I talk to the rich text editor team and make sure that they know 1, that I'm dependent on it, and 2, they know the date that I needed, and 3, that they have an OKR that says they're going to hit that date. If I didn't do that due diligence, then that's probably on me, right? An external example could be if there's a new technology that gets introduced to a market that could be disruptive. So changes can happen. So there's a difference between what we should have known in the first example and changes that happen that we now need to understand why that happened so that we can be working to reduce their impact next time. Common one for us in Jira is increased complexity, and any of you managing a fairly large and complex and somewhat old code base probably have the same thing, where when we first start planning something, we underestimate the amount of effort it takes because on surface level, it seems kind of like, yeah, I think we've got an approach that's going to work for that, but then when you consider all the corner cases that exist that you have to cover, it usually means that we discover more complexity along the way. So again, we could be thinking, hey, well, should we buffer against that? Or should we be doing more spiking early in our process to better understand it in our planning? The last one's really interesting. I've seen this a couple of times. When you first start a new project or imperative or strategy that you're executing with teams, you're going to come up with a new measure. And because you've never measured it before, you don't know how this thing behaves. So we instituted a measure we call UX Lite, which is basically a usability score. We ask you essentially how simple and how powerful is Jira to use. And we put that in place, and we had no idea how hard it was going to be to move that number. We were at 67, and we wanted to go to 73. That's like a 10% increase. That sounded like a good idea. So we said that's the number we're going to set. But the reality was that we have no idea of the sensitivity because we've never tried to ship something and then measured it against that particular score. So if you're in that situation where you're setting a new measure, don't agonize too much about how high to set that goal. Just set it somewhere north, and you can change it next quarter. The whole point is to iterate and to make these changes as you learn. So in terms of acting differently, if you now get a result back, say the result is short of where you want to be, some of the ways that you can approach this are to think about it in terms of time or resource. So should we now try to, if we're at mid-quarter and we haven't quite gotten to the point where we think we're going to get to our goal, is it worth trying to bring more teams here, i.e. change resource, to learn faster and still try to hold on to our goal? Or can we wait to learn along a longer timeline? That's a prioritization exercise amongst the various projects that you're using. Sometimes you'll need to think about whether it's time to iterate or quit. One of the good lenses to apply to that is, have we learned everything there is to learn? If you can no longer hypothesize about how to get to your goal, then you might be at a dead end and it might be time to move on. This is a really tough one, right? This is one that PMs tend to agonize about a lot, and it's always tempting to say, hey, we're almost there. But the reality is you need to have a good idea of what's the hypothesis that says that you're trying to test to get you to that end state. And the last one is building on what we talked about before, that as you learn from these, when you go through another set of goal setting, you should make sure that you incorporate the learnings, i.e. the idea of a team calendar that says, hey, who's on leave? or buffering for certain things like increased complexity. So you might say, hey, my team's already doing this. We do retros. And I had that response from my teams too when I first introduced this. And if that's the case and they're already doing this, that's awesome. Job done. That's the most important part of what we just talked about. But it'd be nice if they shared what those learnings were in a really easy to understand format. And if that's the case, they already have it, then we're only asking you to write 3 lines for learn and 3 lines for act. Just share that with the rest of the team so the rest of the team can benefit from that. Great. What you usually find is that maybe they're not quite doing it exactly as well as what they thought, because the act of boiling that down to something so succinct as 3 sentences is actually really valuable for the teams that are working on it, because it forces them to think about it more clearly. And it's valuable for the rest of the organization because we learn and we can share those learnings across the rest of the teams. So that's almost it for me. Hopefully you've seen that OKRs are an awesome way to get alignment from the very high level of the strategy that you're trying to enact all the way down to teams, and that it's a method of empowering teams to be involved in that experience so that they're engaged and they want to contribute and they want to move the needle on something and understand the context of that. To us, the Triad is super important, and we repeat that Triad structure at those various parts of the company, and the Triad always has to be aligned. And one of the things that's powerful about that is the fact that it's 3 people means that you're going to have to find consensus sometimes. If one person is not agreeing with the strategy, then they either need to find a way to be convinced to agree, or need to say, hey, I don't agree, but I'm going to commit to do it anyway. And then the OKR will tell you who's right later on. So teams can unblock themselves because they're in that Triad relationship. And lastly, for me, the absolute most important thing here is that we have teams that reflect back on what they've done, to learn from that deeply, using 5 whys, to really understand what happened, and from that build really good plans to be able to be better in future. That loop of learn and act is probably the most important thing you can give to your teams. And when you come to these sort of conferences, it's tempting to come back and go, hey, we're going to use all this stuff. Even just thinking about this learning loop and using the lens with your teams to think about, where are my learning loops, and how fast can my teams get through those? How fast can I get signal? How well have I established my hypothesis and my goals to measure that and to be able to act on that? So there's one bonus round we're going to do at the end of this, because I have an OKR to score. My objective is to inspire attendees to improve their strategy execution with OKRs. And my KR1 was 80% of the room found the presentation interesting. So what I'm going to do is ask you to put your hand up if you found the presentation interesting. And I'm going to count you guys later on, and girls. Oh, thank you very much. Oh, that looks like 80. Happy days. KR2, who found the presentation useful? Oh, yeah, I think I got that one too. That could be a 1-0. Nice. Should have stretched more. Damn it. KR3, who's going to try something new as a result of having heard this? Oh, yes, people. Stoked. Good stuff. Well done. Excellent. Thank you. That's it from me, but I'm happy to take questions now if anybody's got some. And while you're thinking of questions, for those of you that want to see our play on OKRs, I've got a whole bunch of these sitting over there. And we also have the team playbook booth. If you head up to the product area, you stay to the right of that, at the back of the hall, you'll find a bunch of people, including Dom, who did the fun stuff on stage yesterday, that love talking about our playbooks. And, yep, we got a question over here. Do we have a roaming mic? Just shout it out, I can repeat it. Yeah. 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 Okay, good question. So the question was, what tools essentially do we use for OKRs? At the company level, it basically exists within Confluence. So we have a Confluence page that anybody can look at and see all of the Atlassian OKRs. Same thing when we get down to product. So we basically just put a table in place. So here's the objective, here's who owns it, here's the score key for it. And then we have our mid-quarter check-in, learn and act, as an expand. And then we have another one at the end of the quarter. And we say, hey, forecast your score. And then we just roll that up on a page for all of our OKRs. In terms of decomposition to when does that hit Jira, probably at the epic level. So it's another level of detail lower than that. So that teams are then writing epics and stories which underpin what those KRs are. There's one other way that we also do that. We've got a custom-built Jira system we call PC Central, and that means any team who's doing a project that lasts more than 2 weeks, they create a Jira issue which says, why are you doing this? How are you going to measure success? And are you on or off track? Because we've talked before about dependencies. We want all teams to be able to see that and just watch that in Jira so they can see in and outbound dependencies across all of Atlassian. But if you want to have a look, I can crack out my laptop and you can check them out. Good question. Yeah, so the question was, is there a step between epics and OKRs? Sure. We have the theory of, or the idea of imperatives, for instance, in portfolio that some teams use. There isn't a single answer as to how teams do that. Mostly in Atlassian, we're kind of Buddhist rather than Catholic. i.e. we have principles and we say, hey, act in accordance with those, as opposed to Catholic being very structured in this is the rites and rituals that we practice. So really it's up to teams to choose that. But beyond epic level, yes, they can either use imperatives or they have like streams and themes that they use. There is no standard nomenclature even that we use across all of our teams for that. Awesome. Still got time for more questions? Oh, sorry, yes? Ah, yes. Yeah. Yeah, so it's tempting to think of these as just being. So the question was, is this really different from KPIs, essentially, right? Yeah, so KPIs have been around a long time. I was using them 20 years ago. And KPIs, one of the biggest differences is that usually they were tied to personal performance. So whether you got paid your company bonus depended on how you did personally. As soon as you do that, the team will take a second seat because you'll start acting in accordance with what you're getting paid to do. And it's not because people are bad, it's because what we're paying people to do. So to me, KPIs themselves, when they're linked to performance especially, are just not an inherently good thing to do. That's one part. And in KPIs were all about you have to hit this number. If you're red, you better get back on track, or after 3 misses, you're probably out, right? So they're punitive in nature. You cannot use a punitive framework to be a learning framework. So it entirely destroys the value of OKRs as soon as you do that. Good question. We pay everyone, and everyone also gets equity, which is awesome. So there's no like performance incentives. There is a company bonus, and that's based on company results. It's not based on individual results. Yeah. So we're very much team-oriented in compensation. Even the few people who we have that are product advocates that talk to customers that some people call salespeople do not have individual remuneration package variables. So the question was, how do you make sure you get alignment of the OKRs from top to bottom over the course of the year? The rituals that we have set up on that, initially it was basically we had check-ins with our teams. So the Triad below and above would set their goals on week 11. Then you'd get halfway through the quarter. Initially did monthly, but it felt like too much overhead. So then we did halfway through the quarter, and they check in again. And basically at that point, they're forecasting where they think they're going to land at that quarter. And there's discussion here about, well, have you really understood the problem deeply enough? Your plans to get back on track here based on the learnings that you've had? Have you considered these other things over here? Why did you go down this path? All those discussions happen. So there's a meeting that we set up for that specifically. We expect the teams to be prepared to have that discussion. And at the end of the quarter, we repeat that to say, how do we do? And therefore, as we roll into planning cycle, what should we do differently? So that aligns, and then that happens also up to the company level. At the company level, at the start of any year, we go through strategy planning and then operational planning, and that's where we line up both from Jira to the Atlassian level, but also we have to go across the organization as well to make sure we've got alignment there. Because we're a platform company in cloud, there's a hell of a lot of work to be done to also make sure you manage all the dependencies that happen. So the example I gave before of the rich text editor, that would have been a blocker for me to ship Bento if I didn't get the rich text editor. Cool, we've probably got time for one more. Yep. Have I got examples of OKRs being used by non-product teams at Atlassian? Good question. The HR team has OKRs, yes. The marketing team, I think, has OKRs. Yes, there you go, Kindle and the marketing team, you've got OKRs. So yeah, definitely. Excellent, thank you so much. If you want to find me, I'll probably be up near the Jira booths for the rest of the afternoon, or I'll see you at Bash tonight. Thanks, everyone.